Hello everyone and welcome to the new episode of Comics Inc. here on BigRedBarel.com. I'm your host Reuben and I'm joined this week by Ryan.
Hello.
Sadly, Rick couldn't be with us this week. I tried to think of a hilarious comic book related prison he could be in, but I couldn't think of one. So he's not here this week. He will be back next week. This episode might be a little light. We're trying to keep it breezy. We know, obviously, recently the biggest news in comic book circles is the recent tragic death of Stan Lee. And we're trying to, we want to do an episode on that, but we want to make sure we're all here. We can really just take our time, dig into it, talk about everything that he kind of achieved, everything he made, and how comics as a medium basically wouldn't exist without him. So I won't talk too much about him today, but that's why we'll probably next episode, hopefully the gang will all be here, and we'll be doing a bumper edition on Stan Lee. But for now, we're just trawling the headlines, just talking about some fun stuff we've been reading and looking at recently. Yeah, so we'll go straight into it then. Ryan, are you particularly familiar with the video game League of Legends?
I think I've played it about once in my life. My housemate at uni, he played it all the time, so I've got like the tiniest bit of knowledge, but apart from that, it's pretty poor, I'll be honest. Okay,
that makes you like slightly ahead of me. I know pretty much nothing about this game beyond having heard of it. For those of you who've not, League of Legends it's kind of like again, I'm going to show my ignorance here, like a real-time strategy type game. Anyone who knows anything about what types of games League of Legends is, please tweet at me and tell me how wrong I got your favourite series.
So very wrong.
It's like you have little men and you click on things and then they shoot arrows and it's fine. Obviously, for people who aren't being facetious, League of Legends is actually a really big deal. It's one of the biggest video games. I think it was until Fortnite's recent kind of rise to supremacy. I don't know anything about that either. I'm not particularly kind of hip or interesting in that way. But League of Legends, the important thing about it for this podcast is that they announced that they're making a comic. It's going to be produced by Marvel. It's going to star the character Ashe from the game. Again, I know nothing about her because I don't know anything about League of Legends.
Yeah, not me either.
But it's Ashe, A-S-H-E, so it's Ashe with an E on it, and it looks like she has a bow and shoots arrows that are maybe made of ice. I think that's kind of her whole vibe that I'm getting just from the promo art. It's a series called, League of Legends, Ashe, War Mother. Because I think the plan seems to be to roll out other series and take on other characters, because League of Legends does have an immense character pool, and I understand quite a lot of lore and things based in that world. It doesn't really come up in the game. If you're familiar with things like Overwatch as well, that seems to be much more of a thing. There's lots of information if you want to read the background information, but has absolutely nothing to do with the game. So the series, it's going to be coming out in a regularly released series starting Wednesday, December 19th. And then the aim is for the graphic novel collection, the trade paperback, to come out sometime in May 2019. So I might give this a look, if only on the basis that it might be useful content to talk about here. Like I say, I'm not tremendously familiar with the video game, and as much as League of Legends looks like it might be quite an interesting game to play, I've heard nothing but terrible things about the community. So if you do play League of Legends and you're not a terrible person, let me know and maybe I'll give it a try, because I think it's free to play. So I can get some background on these characters before I read the comic that explains their backstory.
That's a good idea, but I think from what I've seen of it in the past and what I've played of it, it is not in the same way that Dota, the one from Valve, is very what people call a toxic community. So people will just be, you're new, you're terrible, stop it, stop being terrible. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but you're right, there's so much lore and everything, and there's so much stuff in the background that people that know it, there's so much to understand with the characters and how they intertwine. So it'll be interesting to see how they do it and how many other characters they can put into these comics at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a quote in the post on the Marvel website from Greg Street, who is the head of creative development at Riot Games. And they say that they see similarities between League of Legends universe and the Marvel universe, which, I guess with colourful characters, forming teams and doing action at each other. It says both of them feature an array of characters with compelling and diverse backgrounds. And I had a brief look at the League of Legends character roster, and there is certain diverse is maybe the word, but there appears to be like a giant like slime guy and a teddy bear with a little girl attached to it. It's all very strange.
Does the slime guy have a hook?
I think so. Or there was a ghost guy with a hook. Someone had a hook.
Oh, okay. Hooks are big in these sort of games.
Yeah, because it's for... I don't even know what the game term is for hooking people, I guess.
We're going to be getting so many hate comments on Twitter now. Like people are going, why do you not understand League of Legends? Why do you not understand how these things work?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I will. Maybe I'll read the comic book, and that'll give me a great insight or a desire to play as Ash. So apparently she is a Iceborn warrior. Again, I've no idea what that is, but apparently it says the premise for the series is that the Iceborn warrior Ash will struggle with her role as leader of her people in the world of Runeterra and her mother's fanatical expectations. It's pretty light, but I mean, as comic premises go, I think it's a pretty good one.
It's a pretty standard comic setup in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a person wants to achieve goal. Parents are bad, maybe?
Maybe that, let's not spoil anything. We don't know.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, we'll have to wait till Wednesday, December 19th to find out. Yeah, but I think it's the first time this has happened, which in retrospect is kind of surprising because Overwatch, which is another extremely popular multiplayer game with a very similar setup of colourful characters and lots of world building outside of the game itself, they've had comics produced in-house for quite a while, I think. But League of Legends and Riot, who makes it, appear to be going outside to Marvel, which is probably not a bad idea if you want someone to make a comic book for you. Just hire one of the two biggest companies and go, here, just make it, it's fine.
Yeah, it's definitely the right decision in terms of getting someone. There's plenty of places to go to, obviously, but yeah, hey Marvel, you make comics about characters very similar to the ones we've got. Do that again.
Do it again, but louder. So yeah, there's not too much to that. Maybe, again, I might check it out and just see on the basis that I do like video games, and if someone wants to tell me how League of Legends works, then I'll give it a go, but the tutorials that are on the website are very complex looking.
Yeah, it's a difficult game to get into.
That seems to be the thing, and I do not have much in the way of hand-eye coordination or skill, so it might not be for me. The other recent thing that I saw that I wanted to talk about is kind of an interesting one, sort of the opposite of a press release, really. There's a comic that's been recently released, a series from the writer of whom is Jerry Duggan, who's quite a well-known writer. He wrote some of the best Deadpool comics that Marvel's done in recent years. He had a comic called Dead Rabbit that was coming out from Image Comics. Sorry, I should specify the artist was John McCree, I think is the name they have here on the solicitation. I should specify that because comics, as we all know, are a collaborative medium. I don't want anyone to say that I just get the artist's name or the writer's name because that seems to annoy people. But yeah, it recently came out. The 2 issues of it had been put out so far, and it's now been cancelled, and every issue has been recalled, presumably not the ones that have already been sold, but issues of Dead Rabbit 1 and Dead Rabbit number 2 are to be pulled and sent back, according to an email. This is reported in comicbook.com. There's no form source given there, although they have a link also to the legal research site Pacer Monitor. So that seems to be that a complaint was filed for trademark infringement against Image Comics by a company called DRT Group LLC, who supposedly, according to this news story, own a restaurant called The Dead Rabbit, which is in New York City. So it seems to be that the DRT LLC, who filed a trademark for use of the words Dead Rabbit in comics, fiction books, non-fiction books, and recipe books in February. In addition to, obviously, they already had the bar and restaurant-related names covered, as you might expect. But it just seems interesting. This has kind of just happened out of nowhere, and it's kind of surprising that nobody thought to check long-term. Obviously, the name of a comic book is probably come up with long before it's written and published and ready to be seen by people, but I'm quite amazed it got to this point from a company like Image Comics that nobody thought to check.
Yeah, and I guess it's also a case of did the people suing or filing the trademark, how much are they putting on the value of the brand Dead Rabbit? It sounds like something that maybe Image Comics would have, in theory, had a conversation with and said, okay, well, it's got nothing to do with your current trademark, it's just the name. Can we pay you X amount of money to leave it alone? Maybe they have had that conversation and that's why they've had to recall it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
just very strange to have 2 issues and then just pull them, and then any unsold copy in any comic book shop now has to be sent back. It's a very, very bizarre situation to be in, and it's just very, very odd.
It's interesting. I mean, as it's well documented, the issues with copyright and trademark law, especially American copyright and trademark law, are very strange because essentially, my understanding at least, I'm not a lawyer. In addition to all the things that I've professed that I'm not on this podcast, a lawyer is amongst them. But my understanding is that if you own a trademark on something and something comes out that might potentially infringe upon that trademark, you're obliged to do something about it no matter the circumstance, because otherwise it creates precedent for other people to take much closer liberties with it.
Okay, that makes sense.
So even though the Dead Rabbit Grocery and Grog, which is a Irish-themed bar in New York City might not have much crossover with the Image comic book Dead Rabbit. Although apparently, again, according to this news story on comicbook.com, the Dead Rabbit has comic book themed menus and released a recipe comic book. It doesn't specify what that is, but I presume a recipe book in a comic kind of format. So they clearly have some familiarity with the medium, which is probably why they noticed at all. But they have to now, or if not prosecute, at least complain to Image Comics for using the name. Otherwise, they risk everyone being able to call anything they wanted Dead Rabbit, which I guess invalidates all the money they spent on securing the trademark in the first place.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think you're right. The fact they must know the medium to be able to even notice of this. It's not often that you'd have a restaurant, and this is me being, completely naive really, but it's very odd that you'd have this situation where, if it was, say, a random TV show in a different country or like an entertainment property, you could understand.
Yeah.
But it's very strange that a restaurant and bar are the ones to find out that this comic exists and make a complaint about it. It's a very interesting situation. It's bad for the people that are reading it and enjoying it, of course.
Yeah, because the comic book's just been cancelled because it has the same name as a pub they're never going to go to.
And I'd be interested to know whether they're now going to rename the comic and maybe rename the things within it. Maybe.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
That would cost significant things as well. I guess they're now going to have to decide whether the cost of changing things around will match the cost of, the actual income they're going to get back from selling the comic.
Yeah, I suppose that's an interesting question because, I can't claim to have read Dead Rabbit #1 or Dead Rabbit #2, so I don't know how much the name informs the content directly. It could just be a title. And if that's the case, they might just have to potentially re-letter the covers, but like you say, if they have to pull every previous issue, presumably just recycle them, because they can't just recover them once they've been printed and made up, then that might be the end of it. I suppose, if they don't want to have to deal with publication costs, maybe it'll come out digitally. Maybe that'll just be the compromise. They can't afford to destroy and remake all the issues of it. Although it's probably a collector's edition now, if you do happen to have either of these issues.
But yeah, it'd be a good seller on eBay probably in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, anyone who's got a copy has gone, it's worth something because there aren't any more of it. A bit like the issues of that Batman comic book where he was naked.
Yes.
I think
they pulled that relatively quickly.
Yes, they just got rid of it. But anyone who already has one, that's officially a collector's item enshrined for all time.
Yes, the worst collector's thing ever, but it's a collector's thing nonetheless.
Yeah, if it counts, if it's rare, it must be valuable. That's how the economy works, I think. Again, not an economist on the list of jobs I don't have.
I was going to say, you're not a League of Legends player, you're not a lawyer, and you're not an economist.
That's three things I can absolutely claim not to be.
Just from this one episode as well. I'm sure there's been others from other episodes.
So yeah, you slowly, I think if you listen to every issue of Comics Inc., you can assemble a list of all the things that I definitely am not.
That's a challenge for one of our listeners. There you go.
Yeah, go back and assemble all the things I've actively pretended I might have been and then had to explicitly claim that I wasn't. I think it's one of those things. Protected job. I think being a lawyer or an economist, I'm not sure if being a League of Legends player is something you have to get a qualification in, but looking at the complexity of the game, probably.
Yeah.
So what news do you have for us this week, Ryan?
I've got a couple of stories. The first one comes from Marvel again, partially, but it's more about the Star Wars entity this time. The anticipated series of Star Wars Shadow of Vader has officially been cancelled. There was a lot of question marks about this. About a month ago, author Chuck Wendig was fired by Marvel over some tweets that he'd made. We've heard this story before. The miniseries was due to be released in January of next year, and there were question marks, as I've already said, over its future following Wendig's release. Marvel have now released a statement to retailers that confirms that the first two issues and subsequent variants of those issues have been cancelled and will not be resolicited. So I think the way it worked was Chuck Wendig had done 3 issues of the 5-part miniseries. And obviously there was a lot of confusion as to when he got released. Is anyone going to be finishing off the final 2 issues? Well, it looks like we're never ever going to see the 3rd issue. The first 2 may have gone out to people, may not. I think it was retailers had the chance to order them in, and that's obviously now been cancelled. So it's a bit of a shame. I'm sure if Rick was here, he would have said, I'm really excited. Star Wars comics are his bag, and it would have been really interesting. I mean, I for one have got the Darth Vader Collection 2 on my wish list for Christmas this year. I loved the first one. I'm really interested in seeing the second one. So any Darth Vader related comics would be massively appreciated. So it's a shame that we're seeing a comic book, being cancelled, as with the second story of today. It's just very weird when these sort of things happen, because you'd like to think that someone would carry it on. But then you've got artist differences and writer differences, and the whole tone of that story could change.
I mean, it's a weird thing with comic books, I suppose, because so many people are required to make it, and those jobs are so specialized. I mean, we've seen recently with the James Gunn situation, if a movie gets cancelled and someone has that much creative control over the script writing and the design and the world that's created in that property, then that can grind it to a halt. But if there's an issue with someone like a director of cinematography that demands that person be removed, usually they can be replaced. That's not to say that they should be, or that that's the right thing to do. But obviously a comic book having a creative team of maybe 5 or 6 people in total, between the writer, the artist, the editor, the letterer, the colorist, and any, places where there might be more than one of those kind of roles. Having just the writer come out, then that's going to change the whole book. It might look the same as it would have, but the dialogue will all have a different tone to it. The story will go in a different direction. It's kind of a weird thing. I guess at that point you're faced with a choice of, do we create something that is what we initially set out to in name only, with someone else behind the steering wheel, or do we just let it go entirely?
Yeah, and that seems to be what they're doing here. Especially when I think if you'd written the first 3 issues, you've then only got 2 issues left of the miniseries to either change the story or to try and figure out where the story was going. It might be that he hadn't finished writing the final 2, so you could be sat there with 3 or 5 and go, okay, I'm not really sure what 4 and 5 are actually going to look like. So it's a shame. It's another example of something either being excited or people actually reading comics, as we've already said with the Dead Rabbit one, and unfortunately that series not being able to be finished.
I'm coming slowly to the controversial opinion that Twitter is a bit bad.
Yes, it is. Don't tweet anything, everyone. That's the lesson to learn.
Never tweet anything unless you're tweeting at us to tell us about your opinions of this episode of the podcast, in which case do that, but don't be vulgar or obscene about it.
Well, that's it. I was about to say, don't do it, but be nice about it.
Yeah. And make sure to direct any complaints about anything we've said to @StrangePlayRick on Twitter.
Because that was going to be the next thing. Just tell Rick about it.
I was going to say, don't tell us. It's fine. Just keep our Twitter timelines clear of obscenity and terrible things and negative opinions about our work. Just send them all to Rick.
Because I'm sure he loves it.
Yeah, I'm sure. There was one thing I know about Rick. He enjoys a consistently positive, Twitter experience. No one's ever gotten angry at him there, ever.
No. So the second story I've got is DC Comics are giving DC Universe subscribers, their streaming service, an opportunity to relive one of comics' most controversial moments. So 30 years ago, DC Comics asked readers to vote by phone to help decide whether Jason Todd, the second Robin, should live or die at the hands of the Joker. Very controversial at the time. A lot was said about it and done about it. And the horrible, horrible readers of the comics decided that Jason Todd should die at the hands of the Joker. We all know about that. He spent 20 years out of our comics as a result. So DC Comics, because they love an anniversary of something, 30 years after the fact, are giving DC Universe subscribers the opportunity to re-vote in this very influential decision. This time round, either people really like the character all of a sudden, which the Red Hood storyline stuff should have helped with. They are now voting around about 2-1. I'm not a DC Universe subscriber because they don't like people in the UK. So I can't tell you the exact numbers because it's hidden behind all of their locks and everything. But they voted 2-1 in favour of saving Robin this time around. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's an arbitrary vote. It doesn't actually mean anything. They're doing it because it's a little bit of fun, where they wanted to see what the difference is.
I don't know about you. I love to vote on whether or not a teenage boy gets beaten to death with a crowbar. That's a real light-hearted...
Yeah, really light-hearted storyline.
Light-hearted story. Yeah, I mean, it's weird. It's kind of a controversial thing. The fact that it's controversial is just the notion that, as I jokingly said a second ago, whether or not Batman's chipper teen sidekick gets murdered by a psychopath with, a pry bar. But it speaks, I suppose, to how deeply unpopular Jason Todd must have been as a character at the time.
He was. Yeah, he was really, they were really struggling to write him into anything because people just didn't like him.
And I mean, I guess people wanted him gone. Obviously, the state in which he left comics was pretty specific and severe. And they've done, reasonable things with that, like the Red Hood characters who say of him coming back and, they've made changes to him so far, and he seems to be slotting into the more recent Batman comics okay from what I've seen, although I haven't read a ton with him in it.
Yes.
But obviously now they're in a position where they're trying to, especially I suppose that it's a private poll that you can only get into by being a subscriber to DC's service, so it's only really for fans. It's not going to be casual service, whereas the original poll, you just had to ring a phone.
Yes.
All you had to do was buy the comic, and then you just had to pay to ring a phone line, back when that was still a thing you could do.
It's not like a Twitter poll, is it?
Yeah, exactly. It took a little bit more effort, and I guess people were really specifically determined to get rid of him, whereas now I feel like everyone's like, well, we did kill him already. Like, I think if it had been an open to any member of the public, I think given the turn that the internet has taken in the past few years, I think we'd see an overwhelming majority of people wanting him murdered again.
Absolutely, yeah. It'd be as bad as just saying we want to rename him, and it'd be Robin Face or something like that.
That is definitely the politest thing he might get named.
Yes.
Considering that one of the Robins is already called Dick, that's pretty much like, it's asking for trouble.
It definitely is.
But yeah, it's. I guess they're already playing to the audience. They know exactly. I mean, they don't know exactly how people are going to respond, but anyone who's going to sign up for a specific DC service, specifically, in America, is probably going to want to be on the side of, yeah, he's a character. Let's not have him killed. Let's bring him back. And obviously, he is brought back now, so I don't know if there's any threat of bringing in not a new character, but rewriting those issues or republishing them, or just saying that people are less cruel now to Jason Todd than they were 30 years ago.
Maybe. I think it's just a case of they've always said they wanted to use the DC universe to build a community, and this is a very easy way of doing that, because you spark a conversation a bit like what we're doing here, and it's getting people to relive something that was so big 30 years ago. It was such a big thing to say, hey, everyone, decide how this teenage boy gets murdered or not murdered. I don't think you could actually get away with the political correctness stuff that's going around now. Let's not get into anything like that. It's just, you probably couldn't do that storyline again now.
That is also a very good point, actually. I mean, aside from the fact that the internet would make any kind of voting process kind of insane, if you could vote on it, I think you're right. I don't know that they'd ever open it up in that kind of way again. Maybe to like a hero to die in like a what if, like one-off issue, or something they could definitely easily take back. But I think to propose a sweeping popular change to a whole comic book line, especially one that hinges on like a cheerful sidekick getting murdered, like I think it would be a different thing if they were trying to kill off, I don't know, was it the Punisher or something? Because everyone expects the Punisher might die horribly at some point, but if it was trying to decide whether or not to kill, I don't know, one of like the smaller, more vulnerable X-Men,
yeah,
it might come off a little bit more controversially, I suppose. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's like you say, the fact that they're deciding to try and use it to foster a community is not actually a bad use of that platform. Because, I mean, in terms of both of those, I don't have a subscription to Marvel Unlimited, and as you say, the DC service isn't currently available in our section of the world. But if tasked with the two of them, I think that's the kind of thing that would be liable to get me interested in still using it.
Yeah.
Especially if, seeing how people would vote on whether or not they were going to murder Jason Todd would probably be enough to make me go, yeah, I'll stay on for another month.
I mean, if they could do, daily or weekly things, if I can go on, watch Batman the animated series on demand or something like that, and I want to watch my favourite episodes, and then it's like, oh, here's a vote on whether the Flash or Superman could win in a race or something like that. Just getting people to have a conversation and opening it up, and that's what comics are about, really. Is taking something and reading it and going, I want to have a conversation about this with someone else. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, exactly. There's a very specific and large fandom of comic books since superheroes became kind of the dominant thing within them. Is like, could X beat X in this competition? Could Superman beat the Flash in a race? Could the Hulk beat up Thor? Who's stronger, like Wonder Woman or Miss Marvel? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's always kind of it's the urge to pit things against each other. And obviously it's faintly ridiculous because actually, if you think about it for any kind of length of time, you realise that the only time comic book characters ever really do anything is when someone writes it. So of course the answer is, who wins in a fight between the Hulk and Thor is whichever character the author likes more.
That's very true.
But we all persist in doing it. I've done it more. I've had very specific and pointed conversations about who was the coolest X-Man.
And who was it?
I mean, I I acknowledge that the coolest X-Man, just from a popular standpoint, is probably Wolverine. He's not my favourite X-Man, but I get that he's probably the coolest one.
See, that's controversy right there. People are going to be tweeting at you again now.
Is it? I don't know. Who disagrees with the idea that Wolverine is not the coolest X-Man?
I think it's more the fact that you said he's not your favourite. Yeah, but I think it's the fact that you said
that's
he's not
fair.
your favourite.
That's true. I suppose I can get on board with that. That's open to debate. But I think it's not going to be like Cyclops, is it? Actually,
no, let's be honest.
Cyclops is your favourite X-Man, please tell me, because I don't believe anyone actually likes him that much.
It's just, someone's going to say it, you're going to reply with the I don't believe you gif from Anchorman, and that's it.
You.
There you go.
That's I'm open to being convinced. Tell me your favourite X-Man, I do want to know. So it's interesting that they've rolled out the plans. Well, not even the plans, just the survey, and that people are voting differently. But like I say, they've probably skewed their audience in favour of keeping him around. If it had come out that people wanted him dead again, that would just be, I don't know, spiteful.
Yeah, I mean, it'd just be, you know what, we loved how Jason Todd came back the last time. Why don't we kill him off again?
And speaking of Batman and violent and dark things, you've been listening to an audiobook recently, is that right?
Yeah, I've been listening to Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night by the author Travis Langley. I can't remember who's actually voicing the audiobook at this time, though. However, it is, I think I'm on about chapter 4 of 10, maybe, and I listened to it on my way to work, and it's actually really, really interesting. Now, I'm not a big psychology person or anything like that, so let's just, put that out there straight away.
You're not a psychologist.
No, I'm not a psychologist. There you go. That I'm beginning my list. But it's a really interesting deep dive into not only the comics, but the TV representation, the cartoon representation, basically anything from like any medium that Batman has been in. Him and his Rose Gallery is a representation and a analysis of how that character works, how those characters work. So the first couple of chapters so far have been about death in the family. So it's not Death in the Family, the comic, because that's a thing. It's about how Bruce handles his parents' death, and how they use real world studies to determine how children who lose their parents, how they handle it, and how they handle grief, and then they compare that to Bruce from representation in either the comics or in Batman Begins or anything like that. So I think it came out around about when The Dark Knight Rises came out.
Okay.
So it doesn't do anything past that point. But it talks about the origin stories from the Tim Burton movies, anything from like Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. And it's all about the, how the pearls fall off, how the pearls represent from the comic in when Martha gets shot. It's really, really interesting. And there's little things about how Two-Face is, obviously he's got some sort of disorder because he's got a good and bad, but then how in the representation in, what movie was it with Two-Face in it? Not The Dark Knight, obviously.
Batman Forever,
how that character didn't have that two sides. He was just evil. And
he was just evil.
He was just evil, and the whole point of the coin didn't work because the coin is there to justify his actions. And if you like mind things, if you like analysis of the brain or anything like that,
if you like to do the mind things,
if you like to do the mind things, everybody, it's really good. I had a Audible credit to use, so I was like, yep, let's just search for the word Batman and see what comes up. I've got Nightfall, a BBC stage production of it, which is okay. Some of the voices are a bit weird, but this is just really interesting. It's got things about how Mr. Freeze came about because he was a very two-dimensional character before Batman the Animated Series rewrote his origin, and it's just there's so many little things that they talk about, and they go through the movies and the plots and how they represent Batman's psychological makeup and how it all matches with the Rose Gallery. So it's really, really fantastic from that point of view.
That actually does sound really interesting. I do like the mind things.
Things.
Having something that delves into that, because Batman, I think, is probably one of the more psychologically interesting superhero characters. Like, some of them are just kind of people who do the right thing because they want to, and some of them are like the Punisher or whoever are kind of just too far gone and just want to kill people and get revenge and shoot criminals in the face. But like Batman seems to toe that weird line because he has so many weird rules, and then he has his weird bat costume that he dresses up in, and like he has all these adopted children. That seems like an interesting analysis.
They often talk about how it's in comparison to the big. He theorizes that there's 3 big comic characters that everyone knows, and it's Spider-Man, Superman, and Batman, and how all 3 are orphans one way or another, and
that's true.
how 2 of them have got superpowers, but Batman is the only realistic and believable one in the sense of a real-world setting. And that's the big thing. So it's all about how, because it is steeped in believability, how that also makes the psychological thing in more interesting is because, you know, they talk through the origin story from a comic book point of view, from the TV point of view, and everything, and how the bats influenced him and how he's doing it for the reasons to avenge his parents, but not avenge his parents. He's doing it because he's building on their legacy and things that people sort of know anyway, but backing it up with evidence and studies and a combination of all different things put together. And it's just a really good analysis. And I'm only on chapter 4. It's going to get better, I'm sure, because it will talk about things like the Penguin and how his markup is actually together, because he's obviously got psychological things as well. So it's interesting, and it also touches on the controversial things. So, you know, it said about the Jason Todd thing and how readers were so eager or keen to get rid of him, and what that means in terms of how people are reading these comics and interpreting things.
It's definitely a character that's kind of ripe for interpretation in the way. And I suppose as much as we were laughing before about, you know, superhero nerd conversations that are who beats who in a fight or who's stronger or who's faster or whatever, I think actually who has the most invisible horses, it's still Wonder Woman, I maintain.
Let's be honest, it's definitely Wonder Woman.
Definitely Wonder Woman. But I think, you know, I think that's kind of a more interesting field of study for kind of superheroes and comic books, especially for someone like Batman, who, like you say, I think the assumption that he's one of the 3 most famous is definitely accurate, I'd say. He's got to be, when you see kind of merchandise just in the supermarket, or you talk to anybody who doesn't know anything about comic books. Now, I suppose, Iron Man and Captain America and Thor have probably kind of carved quite a wide niche, but I'd say, like you say, the book's a few years old, and back in 2012, 13-ish, if that's when it's after Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
I can't believe Dark Knight Rises came out in 2012, that's upsetting. But yeah, I suppose they probably were the most recognisable superhero characters. Yeah, it's interesting, that's the decision that you take with it. Let me know if it remains good the whole way through, even though you're not a psychologist, and if it is, I might have to check that out for myself, because that seems like a really interesting read.
Definitely, I'll let you know.
Cool. And for my part, you know, while we've been talking about these interesting deep themes of psychoanalysis in gothic superheroes, I've been reading something that's completely the opposite of that. It's a comic book from Image Comics called I Hate Fairyland. It is written and drawn by Scotty Young, and then it's coloured by Jean-Francois Bewley or Bulow. I'm not sure. It's
a good attempt.
Yeah, his name is French. I think it's Beaullieu, and there's even a joke in the author credits page of the graphic novel about how no one can pronounce his last name. So
that works. At least it's, you know, you're laughing with them and not with.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy to contribute to the fine, upstanding tradition. And then Nate Picos is the letterer. Basically, it's, like I say, it's kind of the opposite of that. In keeping with my apparent comic book like preferences for sort of fantasy but ultra violent that I discussed with Rat Queens and Here There Be Goblins the other day, Fairyland is basically the story of a little girl called Gertrude who has that kind of typical fairy story experience of she one day like falls through a door in her bedroom, in her childhood bedroom, into a magical world called Fairyland, where everything's wonderful and there's all these talking animals and there's all these wonderful things that happen. And she's charged with going on an epic quest to save the land and learn some things about friendship. And then she doesn't. And she spends the next, I think it's 32 years, getting lost and trapped inside Fairyland, as she's permanently trapped within the body of like a 9-year-old, as she grows more and more surly and cruel and becomes completely disaffected with this place that she's been stuck. And so it toes this line between Gertrude being like this cute little girl with her sidekick. It basically looks like kind of Jiminy Cricket if he took up hard drugs for a few years. And they kind of float around just kind of getting into trouble. She's trying to complete this quest so she can go home, so she can leave Fairyland, but she's very good at killing the inhabitants of Fairyland, but not very good at helping them. So she keeps failing over and over again. And it's really funny. Like it's definitely a comedy book. Like it has this ongoing joke about how the various woodland creatures and things are narrating the story, and then she proceeds to then inevitably murder them by stepping on them or kicking them into the sun. And yeah, it's a really funny, like grotesque. It's one of those. Scotty Young has an art style that you're probably familiar with because he did all the Little Marvel comic book covers. And you've probably seen the ones where they're like little kind of kiddie versions of the superheroes with the big round heads. And that's kind of what this looks like, but it's kind of dark and it toes the line between like comedic and really kind of gross at times, like when she's like stamping on people or pulling people's eyes out and just looking like a deranged child who's been through the washing machine one too many times. But yeah, if you want a laugh and you've got a strong stomach, then I would definitely recommend I Hate Fairyland.
I mean, I can do a laugh, but a strong stomach is probably a little bit more difficult for me.
That's fair. I mean, I'd say if you've played like any kind of modern, slightly vicious video game, it's no worse than, Mortal Kombat or whatever.
Oh, that's not too bad then.
It's basically Looney Tunes if they had gore effects. Do you know what I mean? It just
right, yeah, that sounds like fun.
And throwing things around and just being ridiculous. But that's what I'd recommend. I Hate Fairyland. Cool. I think that about wraps us up for this week. As I said, we're going to keep this one a little bit lighter and breezier because we're going to have a proper big deep dive into the life and times of Stan Lee. Hopefully in the next episode. So, Brian, if people want to get in touch with you with your opinions or to tell you that you're wrong about stuff, where can they find you?
They can do that at the Ryan Goodman.
Cool. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at RubesCubes. That's ReubsCubes. And as ever, all complaints can be directed to @StrangePlayRick on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We'll see you next time.
Go.
You and your ears are quite welcome.
For the podcasting goodness that you just heard.
Why not roll on over
To BigRedBarel.com
for more podcasts,
news, reviews, and videos from the biggest, reddest site on the internet. BigRedBarel.com.